My ranch has a little orphan fence section. It happened when we put in a pergola, we took some fence out, and we were just left with this one tiny little section of fence. And right by the orphan fence is a gate to nowhere. My wife suggested that we ought to turn the orphan fence into a welcome sign. That's what this video is about. So first step is to measure the fence. It's about 89 inches by about 43 inches, and then we take those measurements over to the computer. This is going to show the final design for the sign we came up with. The name of the ranch is La Jolla Dulce. Our symbol is this diamond. La Jolla Dulce means the sweet jewel, so the diamond's the jewel. Welcome to La Jolla Dulce. Anyways, to do the sign, we start with just basic typography in the program. You type in what you want to type in and then start fiddling around with the size to make it fit the space you want. That's just a matter of moving things around, adjusting up and down until it's the right size. So messing with the type is just kind of like any other computer typing program. You can change the size and spacing. But the key thing to use a CNC router, which is what I'm going to use for this sign, is it's got to be converted to curves. So in Affinity Designer, that's, I think, on the layer menu, it's got a selection to convert to curves. You've got to wait until you've done all of your editing on the text editor, because once you convert to curves, you can no longer go and change typos and spelling and so on. It's just shapes at that point forward. All right, so I'm going to explain how I get the letters straight. The letters are all going to be cut out separately on a CNC. All the letters have a couple of, at least two little alignment holes that will fit on the fence slat. There you can see the alignment holes. So I place those, in the program where the letters are aligned how I want them. Then I'm going to copy and paste those same alignment holes in the same places to another layer on the file. That other layer is going to be the size of the fence slat. It's just a board. So all I'm going to cut on that separate file on the what I call the alignment board, that black board, are those alignment holes. I will then use them to place the pilot holes for each letter. So when I do that, each letter is going to have at least a couple of pilot holes that'll keep it perfectly aligned. So that'll show later on in the video. This is a sign I did about 3 years ago. It's a huge sign. It's about 30 feet wide. I'm going to use this same material for today's sign. It's called Alumilite, and look in the description for the spelling so it doesn't get confused with a resin product that sounds very similar. This sign has been out in the Colorado winter snows. We're at about 7,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains here in Steamboat Springs. I've never done anything to maintain the sign. It still looks perfect 3 years later. Alumilite is fantastic for an outdoor sign. Alumilite it comes in sheets, 4 by 8 foot sheets. It's 2 thin sheets of aluminum with a kind of a plastic honeycomb in between it. I'm going to get to some issues caused by the plastic honeycomb when you go to cut it with a router, but I'll show you how to cope with those. I did some test cuts using 4 different router bits. That's in the description if you're interested. But the bottom line is they all did fine. So I've got 4 suggestions for you for router bits that'll work. You'll see on this last sample there's a little plastic tail kind of sticking out. That's that honeycomb stuff, and so that tail has to be cut off, pulled off, sanded off. I had a fair amount of Alumilite left over from that big sign I showed you, so I'm just going to use a sheet of that to cut these letters out. Here I'm just putting down some double-sided tape. I'm going to flip it over and stick it down to a piece of insulation foam that I'm just using as a makeshift table to cut this on. As I said before, I'm using a CNC router, specifically the Shaper Origin. It's a handheld CNC router. It orients itself by using what they call Shaper tape. It kind of looks like little dominoes, and I've got to cover this whole board with that. That's how the CNC router orients itself in space. Here is the router itself. You've got to do something called a scan that takes a bunch of pictures of all of the domino tape you've laid down and can tell with amazing accuracy exactly where it is on that big sheet. I'm not showing the whole scan here. It took me a few minutes to scan this whole big sheet. You've got to get all pictures of those. Each letter is a separate file. It gets placed. Each of those files has not just the letter, but also the little mounting holes I put in the letter. So here I'm just placing the M. And after I placed the M, I realized there's 2 O's in welcome to. I've got to figure out and make sure I know which is the first O and which is the second O. The letters themselves are the same, but the mounting holes might be slightly different. So if they're going to fit, I need to keep track of which one goes where on the sign. I just used a little piece of painter's tape to do that. There's that piece of tape. So once I've got that letter on, I just go and place all the other letters. On a sheet like this, there's no grain to this. It's not like wood, so you don't have to worry about what the orientation is. You know, as long as there's room, you can just pop down the file. Anyway, so all the letters get put down there. The first thing I do before I cut any of the letters out is I actually go and cut all of the little mounting holes, in those files on the letter. I don't want to cut the letters out first because if they move a little bit after they're cut out from the big sheet, I'll never get the mounting holes in exactly the right position. So I'm just going down on each of the letters and just pop, 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 cutting in all of those little mounting holes. Here I think I'm cutting the E. That's the first letter I put down. I've got to cut the inside part of the E, and then I'll go out and cut out the rest of the letter. I believe this clip is about 3 times actual speed. So when I'm going around this letter, I'm actually going really slow. That's what I found with this Alumilite. If I try to go too fast, I get a lot of those little kind of jaggy plastic edges that get pulled away from that honeycomb core instead of getting cut off by the router. But by going slowly, I get a much cleaner cut and not a lot of plastic jaggies left over to deal with. So I'm just going to go through and do all the small letters. I think I've skipped forward here in a second, and all the small letters are done. Yeah, they're all done. I think I'm just finishing up the last one there. And then I go and just pull them up. Some of them just come up with the force of the vacuum. Other ones, the tape has stuck them down a little better, and I have to go back and pry them up. And I'm keeping track, with my little pieces of painter tape as to the 2 E's and the 2 O's, so I make sure and put them in the right order on the sign. So all the letters are up there, and those are all cut. The process is exactly the same for the big letters. I'm just not going to show it on the video. There's the welcome to. So the next thing I'm going to show you is this idea of the alignment board. And again, the whole notion here is that I'm just putting the same spacing on the mounting holes just on a board. I'm not going to cut letters on the mounting board, just the holes, the alignment holes. And I'll use those to transfer from the alignment board to the fence itself, just pilot holes for each of the letters. The board nearest me, the longer one nearest me in the clip is the alignment board. The bigger board on top of it is I need to have more of that domino tape. I can't just tape up the little narrow alignment board because the router wouldn't be able to see it. It's got to see tape out in front of it. So here I'm lining up another board. They're the same thickness, which is what I've got to do to make the router slide back and forth, and also so the domino tape's on the same level. And I'm going to stick both of these down with double-sided tape. I will tell you, this is pretty marginal because of the flexiness of that makeshift table I've got out of that insulation foam under there. If you were doing a really nice piece of furniture or something, this wouldn't work. It wouldn't be stable enough. It did work for this. All I'm going to do is cut a bunch of little, 1/4-inch mounting holes on this. So it's okay if it's got some flexiness to it. And then I've got to put the tape on this. It'll zip forward in a second and just show that's how I tape the whole thing up. So there's some, that the router can see out in front of it as I go to cut all of those mounting holes. And again, here, that's all I'm doing. I'm just going through and doing my scan at this point. One thing I didn't show here that's important is called gridding. So there's a process that lets me use the router bit to actually probe the side of that alignment board piece so the digital file lines up correctly on that edge of the mounting board. It's just called gridding. Once I've done that, that allows the digital file to be aligned properly, and then I can just go through as I'm doing here and cut all the mounting holes. For the smaller alignment board, I just use the end of that bigger sheet, and rather than cutting it out with the router, I just use the track saw to cut it out. This is sort of comical here. I realize my track saw is aligned the wrong way, that won't work, so I flip it over and I'm about to cut the the kerf to the good side, which is a real no-no. That's a way to get an 1/8 of an inch too short of a board. So I just nudged over the track saw guide, just approximately an 1/8 of an inch, because it wasn't all that critical to have it super accurate. So there's all the letters. Like I say, the big letters are the same thing. They're just bigger. All right, here I'm going to cut out the diamond. I just used a piece of scrap. It was already diamond shaped, so I already had a couple of the edges cut for me. One thing on making straight cuts with the router in this Alumilite material, sometimes the router bit grabs that plastic honeycomb and doesn't cut it. Instead, it sort of jerks the router a bit. And I don't notice it on curved cuts, but on straight cuts like I'm trying to do on this diamond, it does cause a couple of glitches, a couple of divots. So if I was doing this again on these cuts, I'd probably try to use the track slot for those straight outside cuts at least. And I'll show you in a second. It's sanded out, but again, for straight cuts in Alumilite, I'd try to use something other than a router. You can see it's not perfect. It's got a couple little divots on it. I just sanded those out. They look fine. So now we're going to move on to the installation. I showed you that alignment board I made. It's still got a piece of that domino tape on it, but that's not doing anything here. I just didn't bother to peel it off. So all that's on that board are the alignment holes. I'm just getting it lined up where I want it on the fence. Then I'm going to take my drill and use the alignment holes that are in the alignment board to transfer the pilot holes to the fence itself. That means when I go to put the letters on, they're going to be exactly the right alignment, both side to side and vertically. So I'm just, using my drill. I think these are 1/4 inch holes, and I'm just going to use some brass screws that I had to put the bigger signs, the bigger letters on for the sign. I'm just going to use a screwdriver to put in the brass screws. I'm not going to use an impact driver. I just find that I sometimes break brass screws when I try to use an impact driver. What I do when maybe you can see the little yellow can at some point in the video, there's a little can of paste wax, and I just put a tiny dab of paste wax on each of the brass screws. That makes them pretty easy to drive, and this is just softwood on this fence, so especially with that little bit of wax on the bare tip of the screw, they're plenty easy just to drive into that soft wood. So, the first step is the L in La Jolla Dulce. I can find the pilot hole I've already made. That's pretty easy to do. And even though these letters are, by design kind of tilted and slanted, it's sort of a handwriting look font, I'm able to get them, just in exactly the right alignment by using those pilot holes, because I set that up with the alignment board. Of course, I won't show you all the letters. Here's the A going on. This is speeded up quite a bit. I think I've got 3 screws in the A, and when I get to the Y, which I did want to show on this, it's big enough that it has a mounting screw that goes down the next fence slat down lower. And of course, I don't have the alignment board that goes on that, but I don't need it because I had 2 screws on the upper part of the J, and that gets it aligned perfectly. Then I can go get my drill, and I can drill in pilot hole for the bottom part of it, even though I don't have an alignment board down there. So all you need is 2 screws on each letter on the alignment board to get the right alignment. So same process for the welcome to the smaller letters. There's my smaller alignment board. Here I just used an awl to poke in some pilot holes, and I'm actually going to use some small copper nails to nail on those letters. Trying to use things that don't rust, because the rust would run down on these. So I've got brass screws and copper nails to hold these up. By the way, in the winter I may have to take this down. Just the snow, I think, would damage the D and the L and maybe the J and the Y. But that'll be easy to do. Here's my fancy spray booth. I got to spray paint the diamond, and there it is. That's the finished product. So you can see it's lined up perfectly. It looks really nice because of that alignment board. So the last thing, I got to get rid of the gate to nowhere. It was a ridiculously rusted on screw at the bottom. It's an 1.5-inch bolt, a nut to get off there. I'm literally standing on the combination wrench, testing out the Harbor Freight lifetime warranty, but it worked. I didn't break the wrench, and finally got the gate to nowhere to come down. So thanks for watching the video. I would very much appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Most of the videos are going to be about things I do in the workshop to improve the workshop. This was obviously a project instead, and I hope to show some more of my projects around here. So again, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Bye now.